It really is an honor to be here. It's tremendous to come back to Texas. I think this is my third or fourth trip to this campus, and it's great to see a lot of people and to interact. I also want to mention that I think people know that in the area of environmental horticulture, it is a challenge to develop funding for your research. And I want to acknowledge the Ellison family, the Ellison Foundation, the board that's here as well, because I think that those stakeholders have come together with the university to fund an endowed chair in international floriculture, and you know that Charlie holds that. And basically, I think it's a phenomenal thing. I think that should happen probably in other places. For example, we don't have something like that in California, so I'm envious, and I just want to make sure you understand how special that is. And again, it's really an honor for me to be here and give this lecture. So what I'm going to do here is give you an international perspective on floricultural production from a sustainability perspective, I guess. And maybe I'll just start off with what's on this slide. I guess my backdrop slide. And again, I'm probably going to go through some of these slides fairly quickly, so just bear with me as we go through it. This is tomato production. We have systems like this in California as well, where basically they're combining aquaculture and tomato production in the same greenhouse. So I think you can see the pictures here. These are tilapia that they're raising, and so they're basically using the heat from the greenhouse to basically maintain temperature in that water, and at the same time they are using the fertilizer that comes from the fish basically to fertilize the plants. So a fairly remarkable combination of greenhouse production as well as aquaculture. And again, sustainability, I think, runs through something like that. You can envision that basically, first off, you use bumblebees and honeybees to pollinate these tomatoes. Plus, you've got fish in this greenhouse, so you really can't use any pesticides. So that's another big reason why you would use biological control in that particular system. And I'm going to talk more about those types of systems as I go through this presentation. And on the right-hand side is a picture from Ecuador, where they're basically growing chrysanthemums, but instead of chrysanthemums in ground beds, I think you'll notice that they're actually in raised beds here. And I think that's a big part of dealing with sort of the sustainable production, getting away from the disease pressure that's there. They're doing this in carnations as well. One thing that we are looking at now in California for our strawberry production is a system similar to this. So one of the themes that will run through my presentation is that I think greenhouse systems are sustainable. We always can make them more sustainable, but what we do in greenhouses, I think, also can have broad applicability out in the field as well. Okay, so that's my introduction here, and I'm going to go on with a little bit more of an introduction. I'm going to sort of define sustainability, tell you what I think it is, and then talk about it in the context of greenhouse production, and I'm already doing that as I go through this. And an important part of sustainability in a greenhouse system is biological control, right, using insects against insects in a sense. That's a big part of my research, so I want to sort of introduce that subject. And then it depends on how much time I have here, but most of my career I've worked with a group of insects called leaf miners, Liriomyza leaf miners. And I thought that I would talk a little bit about the contributions that my project has made, and there's people in the audience that have contributed to that as well, so I'll mention that. And again, sort of looking at biocontrol as a very important part of overall sustainability in greenhouses. Okay, my definition of sustainability, and it's a simple one, but I really like it, and just going through it quickly. A sustainable agriculture is one that over the long term enhances environmental quality and the resource base on which agriculture depends, provides for basic human food fiber. I added flowers to this, right? Flower needs. Is economically viable, and that's a huge part of any sustainable system, and I'm going to address that as I go through this seminar. Basically, it enhances the quality of life for farmers and society as a whole. So I think it applies to the field, it applies to greenhouses as well, and again, I think we can use what's happening in a greenhouse system as actually a model for what can take place in the field. So I'm going to go maybe off on a little bit of a tangent here. This is an issue of California agriculture. You may be familiar with this publication. And for those that might be interested, this is free. So if you want to actually get a subscription, you just write to them and they will send it to you. It comes out, it's actually propaganda from the Agriculture and Natural Resources Group in California. But this is a fairly frightening photograph, if you will, because on the cover, we've got unequivocal, basically talking about climate change in California. And what you see here basically are the massive fires that occurred in California that took place pretty much in 2008, so last year. And just as a reference point for those that may know California, where you got the Sea of Cortez here, and here's the Salton Sea. So right opposite the Salton Sea here would be, basically the San Diego, Santa Barbara area. Just incredible wildfires. They're just massive things. Climate change, it's getting too hot, there's not enough water. We're in real trouble in California in terms of basically the way we deal with water, the way we manage water. We haven't got enough water. So, it's a huge issue in California, and it's absolutely going to change the way we grow our crops. Right now, we have a Mediterranean climate there, and pretty much it's all irrigated agriculture. So in the great San Joaquin Valley of the state, we basically irrigate. And this is an article that came out not too long ago that talks about the sustainability of irrigated agriculture in the Central Valley of California. And maybe you don't have to read it, because I'll just tell you that this article basically comes to the conclusion that it's not sustainable. So that the way in which we irrigate crops, basically, it's something that cannot continue. So we're in trouble then from climate change perspective, the way we use water, the availability of water, the quality of the water, everything I think is sort of on the table in terms of what the future of California agriculture is going to look like. So now I'm going to propose another way to look at it. And basically that's getting into the idea that maybe greenhouses, producing crops in greenhouses, is a way to deal with this water issue and the overall issue of agricultural sustainability. And the one thing I'm going to discuss here just quickly is a greenhouse that went up in Southern California, in Ventura. That's a little north of Los Angeles. It's called basically Howling's Hot House. It's a company and a family that grew up in the tomato industry in British Columbia. They've come down to California and they've put together a greenhouse that is truly remarkable. And this is their website, and you can get to this website. I'm not going to click and play what they consider to be the future of sustainable agriculture, but I guess again it's keeping in the theme with the theme of this presentation. This is a truly remarkable facility, and I'm going to show a few slides of it just very, very quickly. First, a little bit of PR. The greenhouse just opened basically, or had a grand opening earlier this year, I think in May of 2009. And I don't expect you to read this, but again, the idea that environmental friendly greenhouses impresses experts, 21st century crops. And I'll just mention this little paragraph. This is the equivalent of revolutionizing the greenhouse industry in the same way the space shuttle revolutionized travel into space. So it is a truly remarkable greenhouse system. And basically it has this almost, and I'm painting probably a better picture of it than is reality. But what they're shooting for is basically an energy neutral production facility. They're looking at a zero carbon footprint for this facility. I mean, it is truly a sustainable production system. If we look at, and I'll mention the economics of this just quickly, it's about 44 acres in size, which is a sizable greenhouse to grow tomatoes. Costs $53 million to build a 44-acre facility. Now, whether that's going to pencil out economically, I guess that remains to be seen, but it's very clear that this family and this company is committed to this facility. If we look at the facility quickly, and I've been out here several times, basically they grow a couple of very specialized types of tomatoes, and you can see, in a sense, I mean, this is a tomato crop. It looks very good. They're doing a lot of research as they progress with this. And I'll just show a little bit of this is the same variety here. And they're trying a couple of different production systems. They're looking at Coco Core. They're looking at HortiPro in terms of the hydroponic production. And just almost anecdotally, we tore these bags open. We looked at root development of 5-week-old plants. And it doesn't take much to look at the difference here, right? A tremendous difference in terms of roots. So again, they're experimenting with fairly novel production systems with the idea that they need to get yields way up in order to make this overall production facility sustainable. So in that context, we can look at that as a model, and again, I think I'm making it sound better than it really is, but still it's something that is truly, truly impressive. There is a downside to the tomato industry in California, and I'm going to touch on a fairly current topic now, just quickly, and it also deals with sustainability and maybe even a broader context. We have a situation, I think everyone knows, that pollinators in general, honeybees, they're going through a rough time, they're on the decline nationwide. We have a situation in California with the decline of a lot of our native bumblebees. And there is a link, you know, however tenuous it may be, people believe that it's been bumblebees that have been brought into California to pollinate tomatoes, these bumblebees coming from Europe, that have introduced a disease into the California native bumblebee population that has caused their decline. And in fact, we've had some of our species go extinct. So again, we're looking at sustainability in a broad context. It's great that the tomato industry is using bumblebees. At the same time, there's got to be a little caution done with something like that. Now, currently, they still use bumblebees for pollination, but now there are really strict rules that have to be followed in a sense. The greenhouse has to be closed. They have to dispose of the bumblebees after they're done with them in a very specific way. So in that sense, we can still use Bombus impatiens, which is the eastern species of bumblebee in California, but again, they have to be treated under really, really strict requirements. So again, just a cautionary tale there. Okay, I'm going to shift from California now, and I'm going to go around the world. I'm going to look at Spain first. I'm thinking if I can follow it, then probably Colombia, then we're going to look at Ecuador, and then we're going to look at Crete as well, and then I'm going to come back to California. So if you follow that as we go through. One of the most impressive places on the face of the earth for greenhouse production is an area in Spain called Almeria. And basically, we've got the Mediterranean Sea here, here's Morocco and Algeria, and this little section of area basically is the center of greenhouse tomato and pepper production in Spain. So this is the area. It's a plateau, not plateau, it's a flat area. This photograph was taken in January 1974, and you can see basically, you know, it's pretty much wide open. This is a photograph taken in July of 2004. It's even more intensive today. All of this material here, all this silver that you see, is all greenhouse production. It's 50,000 acres of greenhouse production in that area of Spain. It is absolutely staggering. To go there and to look at it, it's like one greenhouse after another after another. It's really phenomenal. And this is taken from space, so at night to see this whole area lit up, since they light this, I mean, it is absolutely incredible. And the reason to show this is that what has driven the greenhouse production here? It actually is the Spanish National Water Management Plan in the country that has actually fostered not traditional agricultural development in this area of Spain, but actually greenhouse production based on, you know, their plan for allocating water to this section of Spain, which is a fairly dry area. So again, getting back to my comments about California and water and the idea that maybe greenhouses are an example where we can still grow, manage water, do it in a sustainable fashion. I think the Spanish example sort of reinforces that statement. Now we can go down on the ground and look at some of these greenhouses. We're going to do that very quickly. And I put this together. A lot of these greenhouses are screened, that you can see here. And here we are looking through the screen, basically, at some of the plant material. I am an entomologist, so I'm going to talk a lot about insects here. This is a pepper, and for those that might recognize the malady that's affecting that pepper, we have tomato spotted wilt virus that's getting into these peppers, being vectored by western flower thrips. It was a huge problem in this pepper growing region of Spain. They were using a tremendous amount of insecticides. But what they have managed to do now with that screening, as well as using several new species of predatory mites. And I put down here this is a Syngenta bioline. They supply predatory mites into this enormous greenhouse system. They've had remarkable success keeping thrips down to levels below which they will vector this virus. So, you know, in that context, it's a remarkable success story. And they're dropping pesticide use dramatically again, keeping that theme of sustainability going under this massively intensive pepper production facility. Okay, getting to economics, I saw this copy of the magazine on Charlie's desk. I was roaming through, when you left the office, I was roaming through your stuff there. So basically, a lot of it talks about the idea of the industry is struggling, and certainly the concept that, we have these goals of sustainability, and are they economically feasible or not? I mean, they're easy to talk about from an academic perspective. I don't know if they're easy to put together, but I think a lot of us are doing that. It's another thing to actually get them to where they benefit the grower from an economic perspective in terms of his or her bottom line. So I just want to talk a little bit about what's happening in California with respect to the economics of production, but again, it's going to be a very superficial treatment. This is one grower that I've dealt with extensively. This is their flower packing shed. This is a typical day for them as well. It's a huge operation, basically located in Santa Barbara, California. And when I first started working with this grower in the mid-1980s, he grew nothing but chrysanthemums. And so that basically, and they sold them in bunches of 5 or 10 stems. That's pretty much what their market was. There's mums in this photograph somewhere, but you can see that they have evolved enormously. The diversity of what this grower is producing is absolutely phenomenal. There's product here coming from Colombia and from Ecuador as well. It's all boxed under the idea of being California grown, but still, I mean, a pretty impressive operation. The other thing is they no longer sell individual bunches of flowers. They are selling bouquets. And so they put together these very attractive bouquets, marketing them to places like Trader Joe's and to a Safeway and to other supermarkets. That is their business. It insulates them to a certain extent from product coming from South America. They will grow a high quality product, and they're able to really, in a sense, while a lot of other growers are struggling, this operation is doing exceptionally well. This is, by the way, this is Westland Floral, Jerry Van Wingerden as the proprietor. And he has also diversified into orchids. So the number of orchids that he produces there are absolutely staggering. Probably as many as 500,000 individual orchids just for Easter. And obviously they're basically making corsages here. So again, this idea of being diverse and and adapting to what I think you can see as being a market for your commodity is critical here. Now I'll take another one of the Van Wingerden's who basically has almost had the opposite success. And the opposite of success is failure, right? So this is an operation up in Napomo. And this was Napomo is near Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, so let's say it's north of Santa Barbara. Brand new Dutch greenhouse. And you can see, well, for those that can see it, there are avocados here. He basically cut out this whole piece here, put this greenhouse up, and his idea was to grow roses organically. And he'd be able to market these roses and be able to get a value added for organic production. And so in a sense, that would basically be what he would use this greenhouse for. Invested millions of dollars into this facility. And if you go in there and you look at it, he basically has given up the ghost. There is really no market for those roses. He was losing money, so basically he shut the whole thing down, and now he has, basically this empty shell of greenhouse production. So, in that context, we have one where they've adapted, another has tried something, and it's been a challenge. So the idea that, and again, sustainability, there's the economic sustainability is a huge part of the equation. It's not just environment. There's the marketing aspects that are critical as well. Okay, shifting gears now, going down to South America. Colombian grown, right? So we have a huge flower industry there, some remarkable production, and I've been working down there for probably 20, 25 years. Just a photograph of some chrysanthemums, and I put together a little collage here about what they're doing down in Colombia with respect to sustainability. And I think to see this, it's very refreshing. And one of the things that I do if I go down there, obviously I'm trying to give them advice in terms of what to do, but I think anyone that travels abroad realizes that there's some remarkable things going on down there, so I can bring that information back. I can incorporate that into my research program, and hopefully it benefits the growers in California and in the United States. And an example is what is on this slide as well. So they're focusing really on soil, on the quality of the soil, and on the soil microbial activity. So what they're doing here, they're fermenting microbes basically, that they put in these vats, and here they are getting ready to cart them out and deliver them into these ground beds. They dump this product into the idea of stimulating this microbial growth so they get more of a natural biota in the rhizosphere, which produces healthier plants. And so the first time I've ever seen this done was at this operation. And so right now in my own research project, we actually have some grant support to look at a system like this, and we're looking at it not really in ground bed production, we're looking at its utility in terms of potted plants. The idea we grow healthier plants that might be more resistant to disease, that may give us longer pot life after we produce them. We're try to take all those things into consideration. Obviously composting as well. They do a lot of this down there in Bogota. You can see the giant mounds of composting here and incorporating into the ground beds. Again, I'm going to go through a lot of these slides quickly. They raise their own natural enemies down there in a lot of these operations. I believe Ernesto Velez from Soco Flores came and was one of your distinguished lecturers. I think this is his operation, and we took some photographs of when we were down there. And so basically they're raising entomopathogens, right, microorganisms that attack insects, raising a lot of different ones here and spraying them out into the into their greenhouse. They're also collecting natural enemies from different areas of a greenhouse or greenhouse range and moving them from one spot to the next. You know, something that, in a sense, rarely do you see that happening in the United States. And again, these slides were taken many years ago. Okay, going a little farther south, I guess, and maybe a little east. This is Ecuador. I put a rose up there to represent that sort of production. Here's a typical rose production. You know, neat as a pin, an insect trap outside, experimenting with different types of plastic that would screen different wavelengths of light to interfere with insect movement into the greenhouse, as well as enhance the growth of specific flowers that may grow there, especially roses. I put this photograph up as well. These containers on the outside of the, actually they're on the inside of the greenhouse. Look on the outside. The outside's here. They're on the inside. Is really for thrips. They have an attractant in here that they claim will collect western flower thrips to keep them from moving into the greenhouse, and they take it very seriously there, as you can see. Is there any research to back that up? You know, probably not. Is it a researchable question? You know, absolutely. So again, when you go down there and you see things like this, you pick up a lot of very interesting ideas. And again, just a photograph of some of the composting that goes on with the rose production down in Ecuador. The last photograph of Ecuador, it would be their work with pesticides and what they're doing down there. And they grow herbs on the edge of some of these ground beds. They actually ferment this stuff and they squeeze it through, and they take the oils that would come out of these herbs, and they're spraying that on their roses. And, you know, it's hard to know what is in here and what's going on, but still, just the idea that they're not so pesticide focused as maybe a lot of people think, or not traditionally pesticide focused. A lot of very innovative things going on down here. Is there any validity to this? Is there any scientific backing? Is there any efficacy data? You know, not really, other than the fact that they're using it all the time and they think it's working, and it's better than spraying maybe a traditional fungicide. Okay, I put this slide up here just so you would know that I was actually down there. This is a huge carnation producing facility in Bogota called Colibri. And the reason I put this up was because of this, right? This ISO 14001, and many of you may be familiar with that, but it's a sort of a quality control standard. I think it came out of the manufacturing industry, but now it's used broadly across all different segments of agriculture. They were one of the first companies down there to be certified by a third party for their sustainability practices. And they've gone one step further. Now there's the Green Flower Program in Bogota that you may have heard of if you were at Ernesto Velez's program. They have that certification program, and then there's other third-party certification programs from Europe that come in and evaluate the sustainability practices that occur in Colombia. And again, this is just from their website, you know, the Flor Verde program. I think I put another photograph here, right? The Colombian flower industry social and environmental program. And I'm going to focus on that social part just very quickly because it is an important part of sustainability as well. This publication, a book that came out last year, I don't know if you're familiar with it or not, Flowers Confidential, basically, Amy Stewart. A wonderful book. I recommend it highly. I mean, it talks a lot about the flower industry in California, so in that sense, maybe it's a little bit biased, but I mean, it is loaded with a lot of very, very useful information. But then she goes abroad, she goes down to South America, and she is pretty critical of their pesticide use practices down there. And so this really upset the industry down there. And there's no doubt that the industry, and we see the same thing in California, I assume it's the same way here in Texas, that basically the industry is defined by its bad actors. And I think we all have bad actors everywhere, and those are the people maybe we need to focus on to get them to stop doing what they're doing. But I think the bulk of the industry is honestly trying to move towards more sustainable production practices, reducing pesticides, incorporating alternative management strategies into their production systems. And I think the same thing is happening here in Bogota as well. So this is again, just reinforcing the idea of a social program. And I don't know how many are familiar with Max Havelaar or the coffee auctions of the Dutch Trading Company. You know, how the heck does that relate to floriculture production in South America? Well, there happens to be a direct link to that. So this book basically is mandatory reading by high school students in the Netherlands. So, and I guess I started to read it, and I would have to be forced to finish it, basically. But the bottom line is what it did, you know, from a social perspective, it awakened the social aspects of awareness in Europe, especially starting in the Netherlands, where the Dutch were forcing the Javanese, the people in Java, to grow coffee at the expense of their staple products. So in other words, coffee was being shipped to the Dutch so they could drink it during the winter. The Javanese were not growing potatoes, so they were starving to death. And so the idea then, there was this social responsibility that if we in fact are going to be taking coffee from Java, there's a responsibility to the people of Java that in a sense there has to be that sort of social awareness. And I would say that is happening now in Colombia and in Ecuador, especially directed from Europe. So we're seeing some real changes that are taking place. And that very first operation that I showed, or the Colibri place with the ISO 14001, they actually gave me this textbook, well, that book when I was there. And there is a Max Havelaar Society now that they contribute to based on their production. That money comes back to the workers that are at that operation, and they're able then, the workers then can spend the money any way they see fit in terms of improving the working environment at these different ranches. And a lot of the Colombian growers are a member of this Max Havelaar Society. And I'll just show a slide of this. Is a large grower in Colombia, and what you see here basically are the living quarters of the workers that are down there working on these farms. So they treat them, and again, I'm not saying that the entire industry does this, but it's very clear. These are beautiful facilities. I put a photograph in here of the showers as well. These facilities are much, much nicer than the facilities that a lot of these growers have when they go home in the evening. So again, I think there's a social responsibility there. It's focused on the workers. I think this all fits together in terms of that overall perspective of sustainability, and it is a very important one in well, I think it's an important one everywhere. It's certainly important in South America. Excuse me. The last thing I want to mention about Colombia, Ernesto Velez, who is the president of Asoco Flores, and his wife Lucy, basically developed a program that looked at trying to reduce the violence in the Colombian family, and that's what this book is about. So, you know, I don't want to go into any detail here, but just the idea that, you know, trying to deal with the social aspects of the workers. You know, these flower growers are taking that very seriously, and this is part of that overall program. Okay, going to shift gears now and go back to the Mediterranean. I'm going to talk a little bit about greenhouse production in Morocco. And this is just a sort of a general idea here of some new technology that's been adopted there. But the greenhouse industry, because labor is so cheap in Morocco and it's so expensive in Spain, and there isn't much distance there, that there's been a tremendous increase in both flower and vegetable production in Morocco because of the potential market in Europe. And what I put here was a little bit of information on the use of biological control. Just, you know, the idea that it's increasing, I think, is significant. And then the other thing, and I'm going to show some slides of this, is the fact that these operations are making intensive use of screening. And so it's becoming almost impossible, based on the whitefly populations and the viruses that they vector, to grow vegetables outdoors in Morocco. So unless you can move indoors and screen and keep those whiteflies from coming in, basically it's impossible to grow vegetables. And what we're seeing now is these enormous greenhouse operations in Morocco that basically are effectively screened. And this is one such facility, and you can see it's really in the desert, but the entire thing is screened. We'll all have lab coats on, and we're going into the greenhouse. I just took this from the top so you get an idea of the size of this one facility. And again, just a close-up there, the whole thing is screened. And what's interesting, one of the problems we have, and maybe we have that problem here in Texas, when we deal with Californian growers and talk about screening, you know, they're concerned about airflow, reducing airflow, and how they can accommodate that. And this is all passive airflow. There's no fans. There's nothing here. And now, granted, it's tomatoes. It's not flowers. But still, the idea that they can grow an excellent quality crop with this intense screening, you know, speaks to the idea that screening is indeed a feasible way to go. And then what's nice about this facility is as you walk into it, there's a baffle system with these yellow cards. So in a sense, you kind of walk through it, and you walk through a foot bath as well. But the concept is that any whiteflies that might be on your clothes, you know, they're unlikely to actually make it into the greenhouse facility per se. And here we are basically coming out of the greenhouse facility. And then I just put a photograph of the tomato production there as well. So again, just a brief schematic there of tomato production that's sustainable, I think, in Morocco. Staying in the Mediterranean, and now looking at what's going on in Crete, I guess. And this is in westernmost Crete. So a tremendous concentration of greenhouses here, you know, truly remarkable. And I think 50% of all the greenhouse production in Greece basically is done on the island of Crete. I was here not too long ago. We visited a rose greenhouse that was organically producing roses. They were using hardly any pesticides, all biological control. And I took and I guess this biocontrol is kind of unintentional, and that's this little guy right here. Again, just a little amphibian that's in there. And you know, obviously this is not really contributing to their pest control, but the idea that it's clear that they're not using any organophosphate insecticides in this rose range. If they were, we would not see these frogs jumping around. So again, a good sign, good quality roses. Again, the idea of going organic in this facility in the area of fairly intense greenhouse production. I'm going to take another drink here. So that's my tour around the world. I'm going to come back home now. I'm going to talk about biological control. Many of you may be familiar with this stamp. I hope maybe some of you are. Basically, a Dutch stamp from the Netherlands, right, that celebrates 75 years of biological control of greenhouse whitefly by the parasite Encarsia formosa. So this is the greenhouse whitefly. And this is Encarsia formosa. So again, the country of the Netherlands celebrating 75 years of successful biological control. An amazing achievement. Probably hasn't really been there's no equivalent, I don't think. No matter what system you look at, something that has been as long-term and as successful as what is represented on this slide. So there's been tremendous accomplishments in greenhouses, and I think that what we can learn from a greenhouse system, we certainly can apply in the field, and that's going to be a theme as I go through this. I put together a few pieces of information on, I guess, what I perceived to be the size of the greenhouse industry in the world. And I don't know, maybe Charlie would disagree, or maybe we can argue about these numbers. Sometimes it's hard to get your arms around this. But my estimate is that there's 2.28 million hectares in vegetable production and about 120,000 hectares in flowers. And so I think we have a long way to go in terms of biological control, so I'm going to put here that only a small percentage is under augmentative biological control. In other words, when you buy natural enemies, you release them into a greenhouse. Fairly small percentage. I'm going to say less than 10% of the total acreage, so we do have a ways to go, I think, in terms of getting biological control adopted. We certainly have a ways to go in North America. I think about 75% of all the natural enemies used in greenhouses is done in Europe. We have about 10% in North America, and we can take the other 15% and say they use it in Africa, they use it in South America, and they use it in Asia. So again, I think Europe is way ahead of us. Maybe as that stamp indicated, we have a long ways to go. There are 160 species of natural enemies available commercially that you can buy. I don't know if people have, maybe if you're an entomologist, you have a sense of that. If you're in plant sciences, maybe it's an incredible number. There's about 75, do I have that up there? About 75 companies around the world that produce natural enemies. So there is this rich resource available. Of course, what comes with that resource is how to use them, basically, and understanding them. They're not pesticides. They are living animals that have to be used, that are going to forage and look for prey as they go through the greenhouse. So, it's not maybe as simple as using a pesticide, but it's very clear that they're available. This technology is there, and I think if you understand that, you can make effective use of them in both flowers as well as in vegetables. I'll mention here at the very bottom of this slide, there's a major research focus on endemic species. By endemic, I mean native. One of the issues we have with the whole concept of terrorism and agricultural, potentially biological terrorism, is a focus on restricting the movement of everything that may have pests on it, including natural enemies. It's very difficult to bring natural enemies in that may not be established in the United States. So because of that, there may be 160 species available worldwide, but reality is you can't really bring all of those into the U.S. So there's been a focus focus then on more endemic natural enemies, and part of my program we're looking at 2 natural enemies that are native to California, trying to understand how to use them in greenhouses. But I'm going to actually go back in time here a little bit and talk about where I think my major contribution has been to biological control in greenhouses. These are 4 flies. Hopefully you recognize that these are flies. These are leaf mining flies. And so I'm going to give you an introduction to them all. This is the vegetable leaf miner here. This is the tomato leaf miner here. This is the pea leaf miner here. This is the chrysanthemum leaf miner here. But this is the one that really is causing all of our trouble pretty much around the world. This is Liriomyza trifolii. It's called the serpentine leaf miner because it lays its eggs in a leaf. The egg hatches. You get a maggot that kind of makes a windy serpentine mine. Hence it's called the serpentine leaf miner. So I would say that the past 30 years of my career have been focused on understanding that insect in the middle, its natural enemies, and how to use them effectively in a biological control program. Okay, the injury that can occur, and I'm going back in time here. So we've got individual chrysanthemum leaves that have been mined, and hopefully you can see those white windy mines. You take those and you put them on a plant, and there's hardly any photosynthetic area left. So a colossal problem for a commercial grower. We use yellow sticky traps to monitor these flies, and I think, this is trap number 19. It's a big trap. You probably don't need to really count all the flies there to know that you have a problem if you are a grower. I mean, there's a staggering number on here, but we did indeed count all these flies. This is trap number 19. And then I guess in 1991 we started monthly use reporting of pesticides in California. So every grower, basically, they have to report the pesticides that they use every month. They report that to the Ag Commissioner. This photograph was taken in the late 1980s before they had to do this real strict record keeping. So we had one grower that would basically write down the pesticides on a piece of cardboard and stick that in the side of the greenhouse. And every time he sprayed, he would list the pesticides that he sprayed. So this is one crop of chrysanthemums. And I realize you can't read this, but I'm going to go through it quickly since I know what's here. We're using Temic. I think on June 26th, we're using a combination of orthene plus Pounce, right? Orthene is acephate, Pounce is permethrin, a tank mix. Love to use tank mixes. We go in with another application of Temic. It looks like we're using Dursban here. Looks like another application of methylparathion plus Pounce. We're coming back in with orthene, another application. Now we're using a methylparathion plus thiodan. We've got an application of Dursban, orthene, and we finish the crop off with an application of thiodan. 12-week crop, 12 weekly applications of pesticides, about as toxic a group of compounds that are tank mixed that you can possibly imagine. And even though the growers are doing that, they're still having astronomical populations of leaf miners on their chrysanthemums because this system is perfect. You got a greenhouse, you got a trap population, you're spraying them with pesticides, you're going to have an insect population that's going to develop resistance to pesticides. So basically that's what we were dealing with here. Now, as an assistant professor starting at UC Riverside and walking out and looking at a greenhouse like this, on the one hand the grower's looking at this as a horror situation, but as an assistant professor this is a gold mine. So you have an opportunity here. No matter what you do, you're going up. Basically you're adding to the knowledge. Obviously whatever you do, the growers really care about. And so the big challenge though is to take a system like this that obviously is totally pesticide dominant, tremendous resistance problem. It's an aesthetic value crop as well. How do you move this to a sustainable system, and how do you get biological control to actually work in this system? And so I'll say very quickly that I didn't do this myself, that I was very fortunate to have combined with at the time, I don't know if you recognize this gentleman, but this is back in the days in the Department of Biology at UC Riverside. Dr. Hines was a student there. Then he moved into my project, and I never really looked at him as a student. He was always a colleague. And together, I think, we moved the idea of sustainable leaf miner control forward in leaps and bounds. And I'm going to talk about that quickly. Obviously, this is a serpentine leaf miner. Here, Dr. Hines is building one of his famous field cages. And this is the parasite that we worked with. And here we are pretty much, this is 1989. We're down in Colombia giving giving presentations there. So again, this work not only had applicability for growers in California, but certainly the leaf miner was a huge problem around the world, and it's a huge problem in vegetable crop production as well. So I think the work that we did, not only, I think it transcended chrysanthemums and had much broader application. So basically, how do you deal with, how do you begin, working with biological control of the leaf miner? Well, we want to look at parasites, right, in the order Hymenoptera. Of course, you start looking at families, and you end up with about 77 genera. I mean, there's a lot of them out there. So, you got to kind of narrow them down. So basically, we can do that to a certain extent. There are 41 species that are found attacking Liriomyza. Okay, that's the big genus of the serpentine leaf miner. And then we can narrow it down. There are actually 28 species where they specifically attack Liriomyza trifoliae. And so in a sense, you're taking a broad range and you're sort of narrowing them down. And then, of course, you need to go into California and find out what we have present in California. So we spent a fair amount of time doing that. And let me see if getting ahead of myself here. Yeah, okay, we decided on really focusing on this one species, this Diglyphus isaiah that you can see the schematic of here. And so what I would say Dr. Hines and I did, we began with the native fauna. We looked at the Braconids, basically, a separate family. We looked at the Eulophidae, which is where Diglyphus is. We focused eventually on several species of Diglyphus, zeroing in on one, and a lot of sort of logic to how we progressed here too, trying to narrow it down, figuring out which one would be the best one to use. But, you look at the publication record for both Dr. Hines and myself, and there's got to be 200 publications about leaf miners and about these parasites. We looked at biology, looked at host range, foraging behavior, how they respond to pest densities in the field, looking at compatibility with pesticides, how to sample, how to release them, developing predictive models in terms of how many you need to release into a greenhouse to get effective control. All the things that maybe you could think of, we tried to think of and back up with scientific information. We worked with mass rearing, and then we also worked very closely with some of these larger commercial insectaries around the world. And Dr. Hines did a lot of work in this area. And the one thing that I'll mention, what Dr. Hines observed was that, well, first off, this parasite has a male-biased sex ratio. So left to its own devices, there's more males than females produced. From a biocontrol perspective, you don't really want the males because they don't do anything. It's the females that sting the larvae and lay the eggs and control the pest. So if anything, if you're trying to mass rear it, you don't want males, you want more females than males. And Dr. Hines, through his careful work, found out that you could basically control what hosts were offered to the parasite. So in fact, you could switch that sex ratio from one that's male bias to one that's female bias. And working with the commercial insectaries, Dr. Hines was able to really, I think, move this whole mass rearing project forward so that that technology, which is years old now, is still used by the commercial insectary industry around the world to raise parasites, these Diglyphus parasites that are basically, so when you buy the parasites, you get more females than you do males. And this is what's available commercially now. Coppert has what they call MyGlyphus that's available. And again, the information isn't really important. And this is a Digline, which is, again, short for Diglyphus, that's produced by Syngenta Bioline. And there are other companies that make these, that produce these natural enemies for sale as well. Okay, and the most satisfying thing that I can honestly say from my perspective, this is Gerbera production in California, and the leaf miner, the serpentine leaf miner, also attacks Gerbera, and so beautiful crop, hydroponic production. Leaf miners can get on this crop. Every Gerbera grower in California makes use of Diglyphus for leaf miner control. So there's no pesticide sprayed pretty much for leaf miners, and the control that they get, there's still mines, but the control is below the level that causes any damage to these flowers. And when you go into a greenhouse, and if you're in California, you're lucky enough to go in one of these Gerbera production facilities, and you look at the flowers, and certainly colors are more attractive. What you see, these little specks here, these are parasites in the genus Diglyphus. So in other words, they're moving up to the flowers as part of how they mate, basically. But there's so many that are down in the crop providing biological control of leaf miners that as you walk through this crop and you look at the flowers, you see these parasitoids present on the crop. And I have another photograph of that as well, and they stand out a little bit better on the flowers. So again, when I see that and I think about the work that we did, and granted, I probably am taking, actually Dr. Hines should take more credit than me for this, and there's other people that were involved as well. But absolutely, when you see this and you think of the work that we did, you know, it is pretty satisfying to see that we've actually moved it to this point. You know, I'm going to probably end the presentation here. I was going to go through some of my more recent work, but I'm thinking that maybe it would be appropriate to stop here, maybe have some questions asked.
That's 2 minutes fast right there, so it's actually 12 till. So you have another 2 minutes and 48 seconds.
Okay. Okay, so there's another graduate student, not a graduate student, there's another postdoc that I was able to work with for about 5 years. He's pictured here, Roy Caspi. He's moved back to Israel now. And one of the things that we wanted to do was see if we could improve even the control we were getting with Diglyphus. So we wanted to see if we could use the sterile insect technique, and I'm going to talk about that in a second here. Could we take flies, sterilize them, release them into a greenhouse, add Diglyphus, and get even better control of leaf miners. So that was the premise. And I don't know if you're familiar with the sterile insect technique, basically, and this slide didn't quite come out right, but you mass rear the flies, you sterilize them at radiation, you release them into an area populated by the wild pest, wild leaf miner. They've got to be, so you're sterilizing the males. They've got to be high quality because they're going to be competing with wild males for the right to mate with a female. And then repeated releases of sterile males for several successive generations ideally is designed to eradicate the pest population. So that's the sort of the premise behind using SIT, the sterile insect technique. Didn't develop in greenhouses, not at all. I don't know if you're familiar with this. There's a lot of work that's gone on in Texas, basically. Dr. Nippling was one of the first to come up with this, basically. He developed the SIT technique primarily against this nasty pest, the screwworm fly. Been used extensively to move that screwworm fly population basically out of the United States, down into Central America. Hugely successful. But you think about it, you can release those flies outdoors in Texas and reduce the field population. Well, if we've got a greenhouse population that basically is not as mobile and is sort of captured, and if we can release enough sterilized flies into the greenhouse, we should be able to get the same results. So if anything, the idea of success for us might even be better in a greenhouse system. So that's sort of the approach that we took. And then the goal was, at this point, to see if we could take these sterilized flies, together with Diglyphus, release them into a greenhouse and get leaf miner control. And so this work we've done in small cages that are shown here. We've done them in greenhouse size replications. We've replicated again and again and again. And the results have been the same every time we have tried it. And so basically, I'll just use this slide on the right. This is basically mines. This is mines per plant. This is mines per cage. Here's our control, the number of mines. Here's just using Diglyphus. Here's just using the sterile males. And then the combination together. So we're able to really drive leaf miner populations to even lower levels, statistically so, by using leaf miners, sterilized leaf miners plus Diglyphus, plus that parasitoid. Now, the issue comes down to, what's the practical aspect of this? Is there anyone out there that's going to sterilize leaf miners and release them into a greenhouse? And I guess the answer to that at this point is not really. So in a sense, we've developed the practical nature of this, but we've always fallen short in terms of getting someone to pick it up from a commercial perspective. And there are massive SIT programs in the United States now, all of them being run pretty much by USDA. So we've tried to get USDA interested in doing this, but for leaf miner control on floricultural crops, it's not really a priority for them. So I think proof of concept was fantastic, but in reality, we really couldn't move this forward. But there's something else that came out of it, and I'm going to end with the practical aspect of this. And that is the idea that we have this interaction. We have Diglyphus on this side, and we've got our sterilized leaf miner here. And what people have proposed, both Nippling, and I put Barclay up here as well, and I'll just talk about Nippling. Nippling claims that the combination of these two techniques produces a mutually synergistic suppressive action. And he proved this claim by using a theoretical model. In other words, there's better than additive control. There's synergism between the natural enemy and the sterilized males. And so while he discussed that from a theoretical perspective, there's really no empirical data that actually has been developed to show, what is going on here. Is there really synergism? And if so, what's the mechanism of that synergism? Well, we had a system here where we were using SIT plus the parasite. It looked like there was synergism. What is the mechanism? What is the mechanism involved? So we went through we developed a study hypothesis, basically trying to tease apart the synergistic interaction that occurred between the leaf miners and the parasitoids, and trying to figure out. We didn't think it basically would go in this direction. We felt that there was probably an interaction here, that somehow the sterilized adult leaf miners were affecting the parasite. They were causing more mortality to the leaf miner population because of the presence of adult leaf miners. So that was sort of the premise. Now, this parasite, it causes mortality in two ways. It stings a larva, and it host feeds from that. It creates a hole in the leaf with its egg-laying apparatus. There's fluid from the larva that emerges from that hole, and it feeds on that, and it gets nutrients for egg development. Then, with some larvae, it'll just sting the larva. It takes its egg-laying apparatus out, reinserts it, and lays an egg next to the paralyzed larva. That larva will hatch, consume the leaf miner larva, and emerge as an adult parasite. So there's two ways. There's host feeding as well as oviposition, egg laying. So the question is, what was going on here? How were adult leaf miners influencing this host mortality, this host feeding, and this oviposition? And I'll just talk about one experiment here, very, very reductionist in its approach. So basically we have diglyphus, we have tomato leaflets here. We have one pair of diglyphus, we have a male and a female. Over here, we have one pair of diglyphus, but now we put in 20 leaf miner males. And we want to see what mortality is going to take place. Is there are we going to see greater mortality here after, let's say, 24 hours than in this simple little petri dish? And obviously, I'm giving the results away. We have no appreciable control mortality. And basically, this is the results, and I'm going to end with this slide. Basically, up here, A and B refer to the fact that we're taking diglyphus and putting them together with male leaf miners here and with female leaf miners here. And so it really didn't make any difference the sex of the leaf miner. We saw the same influence on diglyphus. The gray bars are basically the mortality that occurred from oviposition without being exposed to adult leaf miners, and the black bars are diglyphus egg laying when they're exposed to adult leaf miners. And you can see in all situations here, the black bars basically are higher, suggesting that there's greater mortality inflicted on the leaf miner population when they're exposed when diglyphus is exposed to these sterilized leaf miners. And we've done this again and again and again. We've just submitted a manuscript, hopefully, to document this. And I guess what I wanted to do is end with sort of the practical application of this. So we have demonstrated here that the interaction between diglyphus and adult leaf miners means that diglyphus that are released into the field are going to cause more mortality. And that's what the grower wants. So we have relayed this information to, there's companies around the world, especially one in Israel, that raises diglyphus. They also produce Mediterranean fruit flies. They raise sterilized fruit flies there. So they are currently sterilizing leaf miners, packaging sterilized leaf miners with diglyphus. So when a grower gets a shipment of parasitoids, it contains some sterilized males that aren't going to do anything to their crop, but diglyphus that they release are going to be more prone to host feed more and to basically cause more mortality. So in that sense, again, something that that started off maybe as not so practical, we think has had a fairly practical effect on a worldwide basis. So my voice is running out, and I guess I'm probably past as far as I was going to talk. It's been great to share this information with you, and if we can get into a general discussion, I'd love to do that. And again, it's quite an honor to be part of this group and to give this presentation. Thank you very much.